Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Welcome to another episode of the Brave New Weed podcast, conversations for the post-prohibition era. I'm here with Matthew Hendershot, my co-host.
Joe, happy to be back here again with you. We got a great show.
I hope so.
I know so.
I think it's good too. Let's talk about some news first. What do you think?
Sure. Let's kick over and do some news.
You know, we're growing and we're growing quickly. And one of the ways we're growing is when people share our podcast with people they think might be interested in it. So we want to encourage you to hit that share button and send an episode to somebody you think will find it of interest. When we were last up here, we were talking about a candidate running for Congress, Benjamin Thomas Wolfe. Remember, Matthew?
He can't seem to keep himself out of the news.
Well,
now.
He loves the news, that's for sure. So he made one commercial with himself smoking a joint.
And prior to that, with an assault rifle. Not an assault rifle, but an AR-15.
Claiming that he had used this when he was a CIA operative in the Gulf War.
Turns out.
And that he was anti-gun, and that was his ad for it. So we like his position on many of the issues. But it turns out that Benjamin is literally using his gun to shoot himself in the foot. He's actually using his mouth to shoot himself in the foot because everything he's saying is turning out not to be true.
Sure.
Also, there were some other pretty deleterious reports that appeared on Politico.
Yeah, I mean, as seems to be the case these days, we got a lot of public figures who are not treating our women very well.
They really are not. And he was accused of doing some pretty violent things to some of his girlfriends, really. One of which was stepping on a woman's chest.
Yeah, you know, to be honest, it's currently, you know, we're speculating off of a Politico article that came out, a couple of hit pieces on him. There's a lot of evidence that says that this guy might not be the greatest guy, but I don't really feel comfortable going through and saying like, oh, he did this,
I'm certainly not accusing him of anything. My point is, if he's going to be running on the cannabis ticket, he should be a little more buttoned up. He should, you know, this issue does not...
We need our cannabis enthusiasts to be more conservative, is what you're saying, Joe.
That's a good point. We actually need them to be truthful, honest, and stand for things, right?
And that's everybody. That's not cannabis enthusiasts. That's everybody. And the bad part about it is we contacted Mr. Wolfe. We asked him to be on the podcast. He agreed, and then this story came out. And
he flaked.
You know, we sort of, we were drinking the Kool-Aid on the last episode. We got really excited about here's this bold mover and shaker in the space. And, I kind of feel a little duped.
As you should, by the way. I think you should. I just think if you're going to run on an issue like this, that is so contentious anyway. There's another candidate, by the way, running for Congress in Brooklyn. His name is Adem Bunkadeko. He's a lovely guy. He's a Harvard graduate. One of his platforms for Congress is complete legalization of cannabis, certainly in New York State.
I think there are a few millennial
many
folk in the New York area.
I had dinner with this guy. He is buttoned. I would vote for this guy if I was in his district in a second.
Well, let's get him on the show.
Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to do that next week. Okay, I promise you. So,
speaking of cult of personality, Joe, let's move on to another piece of news, which was an interesting renaming or a taking of the crown, if you will.
I think it's a shifting of the crown, definitely. Go on, tell us.
Well, so a piece came out that we were taking a look at a little bit earlier, who names the one and only Jane West, whom you know or familiar with.
She founded Women Grow, and she's a fantastic woman.
As the Martha Stewart of cannabis.
Now, why is this controversial, Matthew?
Well, because we already have a Martha Stewart of cannabis. And in fact, we have two Martha Stewarts of cannabis because first you have Martha Stewart, who is working with Snoop Dogg.
That's a very good point, yes.
So maybe Martha Stewart is the Martha Stewart of cannabis?
I think she does get to hold the crown, but who's the pretender to the crown?
Cheryl Schumann.
Oh, this woman in L.A. who is at many places, who I've actually managed to never cross paths with, interestingly enough. She has dubbed herself the Martha Stewart of cannabis, if I am correct.
I don't know. I can't. I can neither confirm nor deny, Joe.
That's so interesting. So we now have 3 Martha Stewarts of cannabis, one of whom is actually Martha Stewart.
There you go.
Okay.
I think the only way to settle this, Joe, is a good old Shel Silverstein smoke off. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm not really sure. We're going to have to come back to this one, this critical burning issue. There's another thing that was interesting, though, that came out of Israel, that there was a company called Cannabo Research has applied for a patent on the first medical quality vaporizer.
Well, and it seems like they not necessarily applied for the patent. Maybe the patent is still pending, but it's been approved according to
the Israelis have approved it. It has medical grade metals in it, no plastics. All the finest parts that you can find in a vaporizer, which is amazing. Actually, I happen to know the owner of this company, lovely guy named Avihu Tamir. And one day he actually sat and took apart a vaporizer for me in a cafe and showed me all the sort of crummy metal bits that burn and corrode and why they always break and clog so quickly. And it was a really amazing, it took about 30 minutes. It was an amazing demonstration. So if anybody's going to do this, I really trust this guy and this company to pull this off.
Well, and it's really timely right now. I was just reading an article about they are finding carcinogens in electronic cigarettes, which have become popular as a great way to quit smoking. And a lot of people are like, oh, smoking causes cancer, so I'm going to do the e-cigarette thing. And a lot of the stuff that they found was some of the flavoring and things like that that they were putting in these cigarettes had some carcinogens.
Yeah.
But a majority of the stuff that they were saying is really, really bad for you that's coming out of these is coming from the hardware itself.
This is not good news. Yeah.
Low quality metals that are releasing particles when they heat up and things like that are just getting into your lungs. And we're trying to get away from that with our cannabis. Why do we want that in the device that we get our cannabis in?
Great question. The other thing about Israel that was interesting this week is that they're still debating whether they're going to export or not.
Right.
And my feeling is, boy, if I was a big investor in this, I'd be investing in Canada right now,
well,
right?
I think a lot of people are, but you're right. This is definitely like who's going to be at the top of the mountain.
I mean, if Israel dithers, Canada, if they're going legal in July, they're going to have export to everybody they possibly can. And why would you wait? Why would you wait? Why would you not invest in Canada to do all this export, right? Canada is maybe becoming the weed capital of the entire world at this point.
It's quite possible. I guess the word on the street is that Bibi in Israel made this sort of wind of change based off of a recommendation from our wonderful president, Donald Trump.
Oh, Bibi is right up Trump's ass.
So this
is probably the one thing he gave to Trump.
But Israel for 40 years now has been the front runner of research in cannabis, putting out, great studies,
They've had the longest running medical program. And their insurance, Israeli national health insurance, pays for $100 for 30 grams of cannabis a month.
Yeah, there you go.
It covers it completely. And if you're in the program, you get access.
It's amazing that they would go so far along and then get cold feet right at the edge.
Now, the U.S. is not happy about this, obviously.
Hey listeners, we want to thank you guys for joining us each and every episode, and we want you to know that we're listening to you too. Please email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with any of your comments, questions, or anything, just to say hi. We'd love to hear from you.
Prohibition has had so many bad effects on the plant over the last 80 years. But one of the most harmful and subtle things it's done is it's really changed the conversation about cannabis. It's really focused on all of the harms the plant can do, falsely, of course, but it has really stopped us from talking about the positive effects in lots of ways. Okay, we know that it has a lot of medical effects, but we're not talking about the way it affects our consciousness and how that can help us see the world differently and perhaps more brightly. And got to think about it. This plant's been around for over 5,000 years. It's the most tested, focused, grouped, explored plant that people have been using for a very, very long time. And its popularity ratings are high and only getting higher. So obviously, human beings have a deep connection to this plant. And a lot of us happen to believe that exploring consciousness happens to be a drive that not only human beings, but a lot of other animals in the kingdom happen to share. I mean, cats really like catnip. Goats really love coffee beans. It causes them to roll down hills. Even butterflies like the nectar of fermented fruits on the vines. It sort of sends them into a bit of a tizzy. Anyway, I started thinking about this stuff thanks to our guest today, Dr. Sebastian Marincolo. Sebastian is he's everything, really. He's a researcher, a philosopher, a great writer, a fantastic photographer, and really a groundbreaking consciousness explorer. He's really helped me understand how we can use cannabis in the right doses and in the right strains of cannabis to understand our own self, explore memories more profoundly, be quiet, and really get more in tune with the natural and the sensual worlds around us. So I think that if you're interested in the consciousness possibilities of cannabis, that you will really enjoy this podcast tonight. And Sebastian, I am so happy to have you on the Brave New Weed podcast. Sebastian, I'm so glad you're able to join us from Stuttgart, Germany this evening. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
So your fourth book, I've read all of your books now. Your fourth book is called How to Get High, which is sort of a curious title because I think most people who we know think they automatically know how to get high. You just put some pot in a joint or in a pipe, roll it up and light it up, and there you go, boom. So what do you think the number one thing people are doing wrong is? Let's break it down a little bit, please.
Well, I think most people don't know much about the whole potential of a cannabis high and how to actually ingest cannabis, what to look at for the real quality, at which temperature you inhale it, etc., etc. And what you come up, what was the result of that is that you might get a certain state that you call high, but you don't get the full potential where you get a lot of enhancements of cognitive enhancements, mind enhancements that I think you can have.
I understand. Let me ask you the first question that I should have asked you first, which is, what prompted you to write the book, How to Get High?
Well, for years, I researched the positive potential of the cannabis high to induce and to actually lead to various mind enhancements, like an enhancement of pattern recognition or an enhancement of episodic memory, that is your ability to remember past events in your life. And so after writing essays and scientific books, I wanted to actually give people a hands-on introduction, a very short, minimal introduction that helps them to actually experience those mind enhancements that I am talking about.
So a way of sort of experiencing the positive potential of the plant more fully, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. And more fully is, I'd say, an understatement, because I think many people have a very, let's put it that way, an impoverished use pattern, because they're using it, for instance, to just de-stress, or to actually kick themselves out of consciousness, to actually not think anymore, which sometimes can be helpful,
Yeah, I think sometimes a good obliteration is called for in life, but you have a different idea.
Yeah,
Go on.
Totally. I know a lot of people, and I do that myself, who use cannabis for various enhancements of cognitive enhancements, like I said, and I just, it sounds a bit abstract, so I mentioned some, the enhancements, for instance, of pattern recognition, where you see patterns and like musical patterns, you understand better how a solo of Charlie Parker sounds like, or what the influence of Charlie Parker pattern of playing a solo was on other saxophone players like Coltrane or others, or the enhancement of episodic memory, where you're able to retrieve memories from the past, the enhancement of your ability to come to great insights, etc. But if you want to have those enhancements, you have to know what you're doing.
I think you're right. But let's talk about Charlie Parker, for example. How would you say Charlie Parker, what's the insight Charlie Parker got from using cannabis?
Actually, I haven't looked into Charlie Parker's story. I wrote an article on the early evolution of jazz because I think it had a huge impact there, but that's maybe another story. No, my point was that I think that you can see that patterns are everywhere, and cannabis can give you an enhancement of the ability to detect patterns. If it's an auditory pattern like in music, or a behavioral pattern that I see a behavior that my wife or somebody else shows, that's sometimes can be enhanced under the when you use cannabis.
I mean, the one thing that I remember you talking about a lot was this idea of sort of neural pathways breaking down, or the barriers between different parts of the brain breaking down. And I thought that was really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I guess
making creative associations and how all that happens. I mean, I think your theories on that are spot on and really fascinating. Yeah. Talk to us.
Well, I think one of the basic effects of cannabis is it enhances synesthetic experiences, which is one of the I think fundamental underlying effects that causes other mental effects. Synesthesia is, for instance, when you listen to a guitar solo. And you see colors associated with it in your mind, that would be a synesthetic experience. So the crossover of senses. This is one example. So if you are under LSD or cannabis, you can have those. With LSD, it's more full blown, but you have those synesthetic experiences, which might be, some people say, a condition that can explain creative associations. What happens in synesthesia is that you make associations between the senses, for instance, auditory, a sound to a color, because signals can travel further, so to say, in your brain. With creative, far-fetched associations, like something similar happens with concepts. So you come up with different ideas that you usually wouldn't associate.
I mean, I'm infinitely curious at this point. I've smoked a lot of cannabis and I've taken LSD, but I've never had a cannabis experience even come close. What have I been doing wrong, and how do I get that?
That's what you want to know, right?
How do I get my highs to be that good?
Actually, I think you can have. It's certainly a dosage thing, and some people, if you would ingest a large dosage of an extract or something, could almost trip on it. I had that even with just inhaling, but some people don't have those strong imaginations. But even if you don't have that, that as a musician, for instance, if you want to compose music, you have to have a certain degree of imagination of what you want to compose. And this is one of the interesting effects, for instance, as well with cannabis. Your imagination is intensified. So, and that is. Usually we think of visual imagination, but also it's auditory or gustatory imagination, or, for a chef. So he can actually, if you want to put together a meal, you've never done it creatively, and you sit there and you try to imagine, how would that salad taste with a mango and that kind of dressing? You have to have a certain degree of imagination, gustatory, to understand what you're doing and to create something. And with cannabis, this is enhanced to a certain degree very often for many people. And sometimes it's just a subtle thing, and sometimes it's stronger, that you almost like hallucinate, or, you see things, or you think you can taste things. But I think these are enhancements that have a deep impact and can be used for good.
So I have a question. Are we talking about sort of setting your mind to explore things differently, actually consciously thinking about it? Or are we talking about using different strains or different combinations of edibles and vapor or tinctures? What are we talking about? Are we talking about the way one takes cannabis, or are we actually talking about a conscious effort to be more whatever, creative, insightful, exploratory in terms of taste or sound or painting.
Yeah, actually, I'd say it's a lot about mindfulness and about using and knowing how many factors are actually involved when you want to use the potential of something. In general, I mean, look at my metaphor of a surfboard. When it comes to a surfboard is a great tool, but what do you need to know to actually generate great experiences on the surfboard? You need to know how you go out in a big wave of this kind of tunnel wave. You need to know how to stand on it, how to paddle out. You need to know how to balance. You need to learn a lot of things. And with cannabis, it's the same. If you use it, you need to know, is it good to smoke that amount of cannabis in that situation with those friends and this one paranoid guy sitting next to me? Is it good for me if I'm stressed? Is it good, is this strain good for me with more CBD? Or is this strain good for me with more THC? Or with that kind of, you need to explore things. You need to understand how your mind reacts to it. And so you learn. It's a long learning process to use the potential.
So you are talking about it almost as if it's a long exploratory process. It's not something you just learn once. Am I correct?
Totally, and it never stops. I mean, it's like if you lose it, once you think of cannabis as a tool, like a guitar, it's a life learning effort, and the more you know, the better you understand it, the better you improve. The more you improve your skills on using it, the better the experiences will be. Like with a guitar, a guitar. Maybe you have to change your guitar, and you see, this one works better for me. But learning to play the guitar, the skills you develop with your fingers, the understanding of music will help you to actually explore the full potential of the guitar.
Now, so few people think of cannabis and skill together. So what would be the 4 or 5 things in order that you actually think you need to do to develop the skill of using cannabis mindfully for whatever, insight, creativity, or any other kind of enhancement? What do you need to know? Be specific, please.
You need to read my book, How to Get High.
Fair enough. And before I read, but give me the précis here. That's the point of what we're doing here. We want to entice people to read your book.
I know.
give me. Boy, that was a shameless self-promotion if I've ever heard one.
Hey,
that's more
no
shameless than me. Even.
There's no shame.
Boy,
there's no
boy,
shame.
oh boy. Okay, so.
No, but seriously, you need to know something about the plant itself. You need to know something about what's in the plant, about THC and CBD, how the ratio of THC and CBD works. You need to know something about the maturing process. You need to know something about inhaling versus eating cannabis. How long does it take to take effect? You need to know something about set and setting. So set meaning what's my character, where am I coming from, what is my situation, and the setting is more the situation that I'm in right now with other people. In which room do I have to go somewhere? All these factors actually affect your high and what you're going to experience during your high.
That's really interesting. I think that a lot of cannabis enthusiasts kind of fall into 2 distinct camps when you start talking about this kind of stuff. There are the heavy chemistry people, and then there are the heavy set and setting people. But it sounds like what you're saying is you need to be able to play both sides.
Yeah, definitely. You are, for instance, if you learn more about, look at it as a wine. If you learn more about what's in a wine, how you grow it and what kind of nuances it can have based on the ingredients, you will develop a language that will help you to find nuances in your taste experience of the wine, and that will help you to actually appreciate the full complexity of the taste experience. With cannabis, it's kind of like the same. If you understand cannabis better, you will be able to discriminate a more subtle distinctions in your high, in your altered state of mind. You will be like, this high is actually, you will be able to say something like, this high is actually something that's uplifting and it keeps me intact. I'm not losing the thread. So my short-term memory works well. And I see patterns, and I don't and have mind racing. For instance, I feel like I'm calm, I'm concentrated. And other strains, for instance, or other highs will be like where you say, oh my God, my mind is racing now. It's kind of like a downer. And I'm losing the thread all the time. I'm jumpy. Might have great ideas, but I can't follow a thought anymore. So if you are able to make out these distinctions in your mindset and in the way cannabis affects you, then you will be able to actually control where you want to go with this in the future.
Why do you think vaporization is a more interesting or more controllable experience than smoking flower?
Well, look at the cannabis. This is a good question. Look at the cannabis flower and the ingredients. There are more than 100 cannabinoids in cannabis, and there are more than 200 terpenes in cannabis. Terpenes make the flavor, but also have effects on your mind. Some of them help you to really keep your thought, etc., and some of them are more uplifting. If you use a vaporizer, you can set it to 160 degrees. Sorry, guys, I don't know the Fahrenheit conversions.
I think it's around 368 degrees.
Something, yeah. And it's
approximately
160 degrees approximately. You boil THC at 180 degrees, more or less, 160 to 80, you get CBD, and others. All these ingredients have different boiling points. So they are released in the air at different boiling points. So if you put a vaporizer to 160 degrees, you will extract a completely different mix from the plant than you get at 220 degrees. And so you can actually experiment having only one variety of cannabis, and you can actually experiment with that and see where that takes you.
Now, are there indicators that somebody can reference to sort of get a head start on this stuff, or is it really only an experience-based process to learn, all these things that you're discussing?
What do you mean indicators?
Like if I were looking for a specific high or a specific, like I want to be clear-headed, but I also want to be inspired to create without getting drowsy. Is there like an indicator that I can track towards? Or
it's a plant. So, that's the problem with plants. We can't really control them. But what do you think, Sebastian? Do you think there's ways of sort of driving the high in different directions?
Oh, definitely. I mean, for instance, if you are using... if you can make certain mistakes if you are harvesting too late, if you leave your cannabis or if you let it sit there in the heat and the air for a week or so or longer, and if you then put it in a joint, you will actually have a lot more CBN, cannabinol, in it, which is actually something that's more of a sedative and actually more confusing. So this is something where you're probably not going to be able to keep a thought, to be thinking straight for a long time, and to have your sustained attention on something. You're going to be jumpy and a bit confused. So this is one thing that I'd say I'd specialize on. This is what a vaporizer is great for. At a lower, I like the lower temperatures, like 170, 160 degrees, 165 degrees or so. Because that actually leaves you a lot cognitively a lot more intact, and you get a clearer high, and you are cognitively much more functional. But then, of course, it's also the strain. I mean, it's generally the sativas. I mean, today, of course, it's hard to only think only in terms of sativas and indicas, because, I mean, they're all hybrids now, and sometimes somebody will come to you and say this is like an 80% sativa, but it will have more of a indica genetic. So it's, you'd have to look for the chemomorph, for the profile actually of the plant to say more about it.
It's really pretty hard to know what you're smoking. Let's face it. It's almost impossible, I think.
Yeah, it's difficult.
I think the climate, I think the sun, I think all these things really make a big switch. And the genetics have been so hybridized over the last 50, 60 years, right? It's really tough.
It's tough.
But what about... Yeah. Go on, please.
Yeah,
no, please.
It's tough, but I'd say there are, I really, after a long time of experimentation, I'd say you can... you cannot generalize, for instance, from person to person. What might work really well for you might not work well for me, a strain. So there is this, it is personalized.
Definitely.
It depends on your own chemistry as well. But if I only talk about myself, I'd say I ran into strains. I give you an example. For instance, Dr. Grinspoon, who is a good friend of mine. And
To explain who Lester Grinspoon is,
Lester
please.
Grinspoon. I just talked to him an hour ago, and he is very proud, I think, because I told him about this strain that is named after him, which is unbelievable. I mean, it's in that sense, it's said to be a classic old school sativa, 100%. We don't really know the genetics, but that's what they say. And this is, for instance, really interesting for me because it leaves you very much intact cognitively. It gives you a very calm, happy feeling. And
Yes.
you don't have mind racing at all. You stay focused, but your focus, and that's especially interesting to me, your focus is not as in a tunnel, but it's as after a meditation. You're very focused on everything around you. You're very open in your attentional field, but you're still focused. It's not like you're jumpy in your thinking. So this, for instance, and this consistently, I had this, like, I don't know how often, and this is a very consistent feeling I have about that strain that I don't get from others usually. So, with experimentation, with personal experimentation, you can come to you can see which strain, which variety actually works well for you in that respect. Don't trust whatever people, Leafly or whoever, says about the strains. That might work or not, might be an indicator, but trust your own experimentation more.
So, what are some of the top tips? Let's say I really want to dig into this and start experimenting and really find my optimal high. What are some of the tips that you would give me to set out on that path?
First of all, change your attitude. Value your high. A lot of people, I think, they are not using it for those purposes, and they are not paying attention much to their high. Some of them create great ideas, but they forget it. So one thing would be, for instance, to actually write something down. If you have an idea, sometimes it's stupid, sometimes it might be really good. Write it down, note it. You don't have to note down the whole thing. Just make a short note about if you thought about something. Maybe you found a new melody. Maybe it's a memory that came up from your childhood. See your high, this altered state of mind, as something that might be valuable to your life. This is it may sound a little silly, but this change in attitude will help you a lot. And we know that from research about creativity and insights, that a lot of the insights happen while you're, for instance, in a state of relaxation under the shower. But if you go under the shower, you have great ideas, but you don't have the mindfulness to actually track them to some degree and be like, come out of it and say, hey, I just had a good idea. Let's write it down. Let's explore this. You're going to lose it. Same with a high. You're going to develop a lot of good things during a high in your mind. But if you don't feel like you should develop it, you're going to lose it.
Do you think there's a difference in what happens mentally between eating edibles and using other forms of the plant, like vaporization?
Well, apart from that, it takes much longer to take effect. I have a feeling that the high comes more out of the body usually, and which can be great for some people to stimulate the body and to actually have completely different tactile experiences, etc. But generally, I wouldn't call myself an expert. I don't have too much. I had some bad experiences with the edibles, so I'm more into vaporizers.
Before you knew how to dose them correctly, right?
Yeah, it's really
as
hard
everybody
to dose.
did.
Seriously, it is hard to dose with that, especially if you don't get your cannabis from a market where you know it exactly what's in it and what the ratios are. So I would, and this is one of the most important things I'd advise people. If you start experimenting, or if you want to go into that, don't start with edibles. It's just a bad idea. You should use edibles if you know what you're doing.
Well, or if you can find a 5 to 10 milligram edible that's clearly labeled.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
When you live in a legal state or in a legal country like Canada is going to be, it's just going to change everything. It's like knowing that a shot is the equivalent to 6 ounces of wine, which is the equivalent to 12 ounces of beer, right? I mean, until we measured these things,
right.
Nobody ever knew. And then somebody started measuring and said, oh, duh, duh, duh. And then you then you learned how to drink.
Know when to say when. Yeah.
It's basically teaching the entire culture how to drink. And I think that's the beauty of legalization with cannabis, is it teaches the entire culture how to dose, how to use. It educates people, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy to drinking is, I'd say that in one way it's wrong, and or it leads to a misunderstanding, because I think the cognitive effects coming from cannabis, the high that it creates. Usually, a lot of people think of the high as just like a euphoric state of like happy forgetfulness or something.
Yes,
I believe that the high actually consists of a whole battery, or like I call it, a bouquet of cognitive effects, of enhancements of changes in not only enhancements, but changes in cognitive effects. It can change your memory, it changes your ability to imagine, it changes your pattern recognition, it changes your ability to introspect, it changes your empathic understanding, it can change your creativity, your creative thinking. Sometimes you're racing, your attention is more focused usually. So there is a whole battery of changes. You have with alcohol, you have also changes, you might have changes in attention, but I think they're not as interesting as the ones, not as complex as the ones you have during the high.
Yes. Yeah, so it's almost like, I mean, what you're suggesting, A, sounds a lot like work, I must say, and B, it sounds like I should almost have a checklist, and you have to.
Well, once the 7 Ps.
Once you state the possibilities, it actually becomes very interesting. I'm not saying work is a bad thing, by the way. I'm just saying that you have to learn some things in order to look for things.
Well, it's being properly prepared. Right? Those great 7 Ps, proper planning and preparation prevent piss poor performance or whatever.
Okay, I never knew about that.
It sounds like if you want to get ready, you're gonna pack up your vape and say like, all right, I'm getting ready to embark on this experience, but I'm gonna be prepared first.
Yeah, definitely. And you can see it as work. I'd say some work can be really fun, and it's not only fun. It's rewarding in a much deeper sense. I like to mention the collection that Lester has on the internet, Lester Greenspoon, which he put on marijuana-insights.com. marijuana-uses.com.
It's not minus, it's marijuana-uses.com. Correct? No, it's okay.
And people would have figured it out.
Okay.
I wouldn't have figured it out.
Yeah.
It's marijuana-uses.com. And wasn't that a compilation of what like hundreds or maybe thousands of people wrote what they got out of using cannabis?
Yeah, I think he has 100 stories. There's a selection of I don't know how many he got over the years. Must be 500-600 or so. And this was actually a database for me. That was one of my resources for my research. And there are so many stories about people who describe how during a cannabis high they memories were coming up, for instance, from their childhood that made them understand more, or how they got high a little, sat down to think about their kids, and they finally understood why they shouldn't do something, why they shouldn't teach the way they teach in school, or why they shouldn't treat their kid in a certain way.
Yes.
There are people who say, well, this saved my marriage because for the first time during a high, I saw some patterns and I lost some inhibitions, and I talked to my wife about certain things, or to my partner, and I understood how he ticks. Some people see other patterns. Some people have insights about their work. A planetary scientist describes how he could see better in 3D and explore certain star maps. you find so many stories in there that are so touching.
Speaking of that, let's talk about Lester Grinspoon's very good friend, Carl Sagan. I mean, it was such a revelation to me when I read Carl's description of using cannabis. Wasn't it to you?
Absolutely. I mean, he wrote.
Tell us some of the things he talked about, please.
Well, he was basically the first one to emphasize that you can have great insights under cannabis. I mean, others wrote that before, Charles Baudelaire and other writers. But Carl Sagan wrote an essay, Mr. X, that was published by Lester in his book, Marijuana Reconsidered, more than 40, almost 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And he wrote about those insights that he had and about the enhanced pattern recognition. And actually, I took up one of the a very interesting hypothesis that Carl Sagan made about the cannabis high. Sagan made the hypothesis that the cannabis high might suppress the left hemisphere to a certain degree and might help the right hemisphere or promote right hemispheric thinking that would lead to more creativity and other enhancements. I think it might be a bit of a crude statement, but if you put it that way. But I looked into recent research of actually how different the right and the left hemisphere work. And we don't have, I didn't find much in the literature about, from the neuroscientific side about that. But he might have been onto something. So he was looking at it. He was an avid user, Carl Sagan, and he really was interested in the high and how it affects your cognition. And he wrote books about that and about the evolution of the mind. So he was very knowledgeable. He knew the literature back then on the brain sciences, and so it's very interesting.
The other thing I liked about Carl is he was quite clear that it was also useful for sex.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
It also helped him solve some problems it gave him a creative insight into a problem that he had been struggling with for years.
Right.
And when he said that to me, I thought, yeah, I understand that completely. But you do have to sort of focus your mind on it, don't you? You do have to actually think about it and say, well, I mean, I'm not sure you have to think about sex too hard, but if you're working on a problem,
absolutely,
you have to. Yeah, but as Lester once told me, he said, look, it's like having a big target. With cannabis, you're shooting a whole lot of arrows at that target, but all of them may miss it. You have to look at it in the morning to see what hits the bullseye, right? Well,
yeah. Again, I agree that you have to actually reconsider what you come up with. What you spend, some ideas may come out stupid, but it's not like you're erratically shooting at something. Cannabis actually can help you to generate insights, and it helps you to come to better pattern recognition. That I give you a very simple example. We all would, like many of us would say, okay, I once smoked cannabis or inhaled it, and I saw patterns in the cloud. I saw faces better in the cloud or something. This is an enhanced pattern recognition. Now, a lot of people would say that, but then if you have that, for instance, let's say you see somebody walking over the street, and the way he walks has a pattern. So when you're high and you have an enhanced pattern recognition, you might actually see that this guy is depressed because the way he's walking is like shows a style that you've seen before in depressed people. That is an insight, and so cannabis leads to cognitive changes systematically that can enhance your ability to generate your insights. And of course, sometimes you're over-interpreting a pattern or something. So yes, I agree with Lester. You have to go back and look at it. Actually, I'm giving classes at Green Flower Media about creativity. And this is one of the most important lessons to learn about creativity, I think, is that you really have to learn how to use cannabis to enhance your creative output, because you can also, creativity is a concertation of many cognitive skills, and many cognitive things get altered, processes get altered by cannabis. So you can actually it can actually hinder your creative ability if you don't know what you're doing.
Interesting. Yeah, it can I know that from writing. It can enhance the editor in your brain so that you actually sort of get stuck. You don't move.
Yeah.
You can't move.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting and very true. And it's because it's a plant. It's a hard thing to manage.
It's a great point you just made about the editor, because this is when you are in the phase of when you're actually sitting down and write. But the editor, then you don't want the editor in there. You just want to spin out ideas maybe, or explore and be in the flow of writing. But the editor is great in a later stage, in a phase where you want to reconsider what you've written. So this is, I tell people, and I teach people also, that when they use cannabis, it's not only about the dosing and about, which strain should I use, but it's also about what kind of creative activity, because creative activities are completely different. If you play a solo, a saxophone solo on stage, and you need to be able to get in the flow, you need to be, moving your hands, you need to have a timing. If you're writing a poem, nobody gives a damn whatever if you're writing this in an hour, or if your timing is right, or if you write that in 3 days. It's a completely different process. So I might be really bad at playing on stage while I'm high because I lose my timing or my sense of time, or whatever, or my fingers, I cannot, my hand-eye coordination doesn't work very well, but I might be really great at writing a poem. So these are two different activities. But then again, there's also phases in a creative activity. You have different phases. If you write a poem, you might want to sit down first, read some other books, or be inspired by nature. Then you may, in that phase, cannabis might help you by, you see new patterns in the light or shades of a tree. But then you might be really bad when you're high to sit down and write, because you can't really focus on your writing. So you need to explore. Yeah. You need to explore in which stage of what kind of creative activity does actually cannabis help me to get in the flow and to actually help my creative output. It has a great potential, but you need
one
to
of the things I heard that I liked a lot was some musician talking about how it actually created space between the notes, and within that space, it allowed a lot of play, a lot of freedom. Now, I mean, it's a very metaphorical description of what it's like to play any song, but I think as a metaphor it works. Sebastian, we have to leave you, but it's always great. It's really great to talk to you. Tell me where people can find and read How to Get High, for example.
The book.
Have you published it online at all?
The book How to Get High is not out yet, so I'm sorry you guys have to wait a little.
That's okay, but tell us where they can find some of your other work. Yes.
My other work would be on you find all the links also to my books on my blog, marijuana-insights.com.
And I guess we can Google you at Sebastian Marincolo and find it there as well, correct?
Yeah. And so you find a lot of my essays online there. You find also my artistic work, my photography, my cannabis photography there.
Which is magnificent, by the way. I have to say, his macro photograph of cannabis are absolutely, it's like looking at a new planetary system. They're really stunning.
Thank you.
As is your writing. I found it very insightful always and full of observation.
Thank you. And sorry for not being short, because I think sometimes you have to be longer.
Philosophers are not good at 30-second sound bites. I know. They're just not. It's okay. Don't worry. It's always good to hear you, and thanks for your insight. It was really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excellent conversation.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Don't forget, every episode of the Brave New Weed podcast is available on demand at bravenewweed.com/podcast. Check out episodes from having a good time with a cannabis cocktail to dealing with crippling pain or anxiety with CBD. All available at bravenewweed.com/podcast.
So Matthew, was that all like too high-minded, that conversation? Did it hit you? Did it touch you?
I mean, it hits on a lot of touch points for me. Like, I really enjoy talking to people like Sebastian who look at getting high as more than just the daily, erasure activity.
Yeah.
You know, we all go through so much, and you know, it's easy to get home from work or whatever your commute is like and just like blow your brains out, and that's the end of your day. So people who are, you know, talking about, and I think this is something we try and do with the podcast as well, is like, this is a useful tool. We talk about medication a lot and uses in the medical world, and even if it's not strictly medical, there are uses to this plant that are not just a party tool.
Well, somebody once said that all use is medical. I'm not sure I completely agree, because I think the sort of stuff Sebastian's talking about, it's not necessarily medical, but it's certainly good for your well-being to explore your creativity or to, I don't know, expand your thinking about the way life is.
Yeah,
right?
Man, he said one phrase that just jumped out at me and grabbed a hold, which was value your high.
Yeah.
And this idea of not just like, oh, pack as much as you can into the pipe and rock it to the face. It's like, no, you're getting ready to embark. And you talked about, you mentioned work, like, oh, it sounds like work. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It sounds like packing for a vacation.
It does, yeah.
You got to go through the process, and you want to make sure that it's right. Because if you end up, you know, in the subarctic freezing your balls off, you're not going to be happy.
No, look, I said it sounds like work, but I actually do believe that work can be fun and that work is valuable. And you know, when I hear him talk about the list of things you can look for when you're high, you do have to have somebody tell you, oh, look for that, look for that, look for that. Or else I guess you just go out and go to a party and that's the end of it all the time. You know, I think it's a little more revealing of a substance than alcohol, for example. Mm-hmm. I think it can do more, but you have to work on what you do with it. I mean, it's the same with any substance, by the way, right?
I was going to say, like, any time that I've dabbled in like psilocybin, hallucinogenic mushrooms, it's you have to go through a process of preparation beforehand. You want to make sure, you know where access to water is going to be, who you're going to be with,
and
the
what your
right
plan
sort of
is. Yes, indeed,
pull out a couple of mushroom toys that you know you can play with along the way to have the most enjoyable experience. Yeah. And I think that, you know, marijuana has become so commonplace. And coming up all around us, and as legalization progresses, a lot of people are just diving in head first without any sort of preparation, and they're just high all the time.
Well, by the way, I think that's one of the effects of prohibition, is that you want to just get as much and use as much as you can, because on some level, it's illegal and prohibited.
Right, you got to get the most bang for your buck right now.
Good. Listen, I'm really glad you enjoyed that conversation.
Absolutely.
People all around me are making edibles. Now, we live in a state, New York, which is not a legal state. So people are coming out of the woodwork, handing us candies. Try this infused honey. Try these chocolates. I don't know why they're doing this to me particularly. Maybe they know I wrote a book.
I mean, you did write
I did write a book, but it's hilarious that suddenly people I know from college are coming up to me. I was at the food co-op buying food the other day. The woman behind me on the line started talking about edibles. She wanted to give me one. So our next episode is going to be interviewing Jeff, the 420 chef, who's an author, a cookbook writer, and a great chef, who's been cooking edibles for about 7 years. And he is going to tell all the people that are starting in this game how to do it well, how to get your dose right, and how to make it delicious. So be sure to tune in to episode 23 of the Brave New Weed podcast. Thank you so much for our guests. Thank you very much to our listeners. We wish you well. Please consider supporting us. I have to say it again. We have no fundraising drives here, folks. We just have support. We just have you. So please consider supporting us so we can keep doing these shows and bringing you conversations from the post-prohibitionist era.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.